I have your BLA posted, and we will go over that here in a little bit. Next week, you have quiz 4, and then you have your presentations and papers due for your Hunger in the Global Environment bit. So your presentations will be next Thursday, since you'll be in class then. Your papers are due on Sunday. For the presentation itself, you essentially want to be going over this part 2 for it. So remember, you're not going out and actually volunteering or anything, but you want to essentially speak about part 2 here as your the main crux of your presentation. You don't need to do a video or anything, but you should have some sort of a visual aid with you. Any questions on that?
The visual aid is not just like pictures on slides, or
I mean, it can be PowerPoint, it can be a video if you really wanted. Just something that you're showing something visually.
And so the PowerPoint is just part 2. The topics.
Yeah. All right, now for your BLA, you're going to go do something. What it is, that's up to you. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to do some sort of physical activity of your choosing. And this doesn't mean you have to go exercise or anything, but you need to do some sort of physical activity that's at least 10 total minutes in a single day. And you just need to say what you did, when you did it, and how long you spent doing it. Use this website to estimate how many calories you burned during that activity. And then you're going to look on this here, which is our respiratory exchange ratio. And we will talk about epoch here as well. And you'll decide if you have a high or low epoch and where on the respiratory exchange ratio list you fell. And then part 4 here is just what can you do, or what could you have done to modify that activity to make it so it was more effective at burning calories. I will be explaining this part 3 for you here in class today, so don't worry about that yet. And I realize that this part 3 especially is a much more exercise phys-based thing. So I'm not necessarily concerned that you get the right or wrong answer, but I just want to see kind of what your train of thought is. So it's more about your decision-making processes, not necessarily that if you got this absolutely correct or not. Because unless you are actually measuring your gas exchange, you're not going to know the exact number you have. So again, I just want to see what your thought process is with that. All right, so today there are primarily 2 things I want to cover. I want to do energy metabolism, and I want to get into the whole how our body actually is burning calories. So let's go ahead and get this started here. Now this is still considered topic 4. But there's actually going to be, I believe, 2 or 3 questions about this on your next quiz. On quiz 4, you'll actually have a couple questions about this. So I don't know why that happened, but it did. Now, we've talked about some of this stuff before, but remember that our main premise with anything related to metabolism is how we produce ATP, or how we produce energy. ATP is our body's only energy currency. You can't use anything else. Calories are a unit of heat, so calories represent potential energy. The little analogy I like to make, or I guess metaphor maybe, is that with ATP production, it's like you go and you drill out oil from the ground. That oil is your calories. You send that oil off to a refinery, you turn it into gasoline, You put it in your car, and your car eats that for food, and your car goes. When you get to gasoline, you actually get the ATP. So kind of keep that in mind as we go through this here. Now, remember that we have two different pathways with metabolism. You have an anabolic pathway and a catabolic pathway. Anything that is anabolic is going to cost you ATP because you are building. Anything that is catabolic is going to give you ATP because you are breaking down. And we say that you burn calories because you actually do. You give off heat when you have these catabolic reactions. So any kind of catabolism is going to give you some form of heat along with energy. The heat we produce is dissipated into the air. It's not used. So all this comes down to this process here, which is bioenergetics. Bioenergetics is just the flow of energy through living systems. Living systems only have one energy source, and that is the sun. All energy comes from the sun, except for nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is synthesized from the degradation of typically like very heavy metals or kind of unstable elements, things like uranium, thallium, plutonium to a degree. But everything else has its roots in the sun. Now, granted, we don't say synthesize ATP from the sun directly from photosynthesis. We don't really have chlorophyll to do that. But even if you think about it, you know, what is like oil and what is coal actually made of? So when you have either of those, it's essentially buildup of really dead materials over millions of years. So typically your living organisms, your plants, those kind of things, they will build up in the soils, compress, form your what is known as your fossil fuels. All right, the catabolic processes we're going to talk about primarily are going to be glycolysis and lipolysis and beta oxidation. Proteolysis and deamination, that's your breakdown of proteins into amino acids and ATP. We aren't going to be focusing on this so much because remember, we really shouldn't be doing this a whole lot. And still remember, anytime you see that lysis suffix, that means it's a breakdown. If you ever see genesis, that is a buildup. So lysis is catabolic. Genesis is anabolic. Now, of course, we all know this one. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. And this is just because this is where our electron transport chain is located, which is, as we'll see, the place where virtually all of our ATP is produced. And here is the overall pathways you would see. You're not going to have to know about all this here, but it's just kind of an FYI for you. All right, now, we've talked about glycolysis before. So remember, when we're talking about glycolysis, we're talking about the breakdown of glucose. On the other side of it, the anabolic reaction is gluconeogenesis. Gluconeogenesis is the buildup of glucose from non-glucose products or non-organic products. I'm sorry, non-carb organic products. There we go. And remember that all glucose has that same molecular formula C6H12O6. So this is just saying that we will split this off and send that here and here. So you get to run this through a few times. Now, what's happening? You notice the initial thing that needs to happen to actually break this glucose into two is you need to have 2 ATP present. So you need to phosphorylate your glucose. ATP, adenosine triphosphate, will donate one of its phosphates ions to the glucose, turn it into ADP, so adenosine diphosphate, so that now we can cleave this off and then go throughout the rest of our way. Now, remember 2 here, so that's why you have 1, 2 there. And then what else are we getting? Well, then when we get down to the end here, you see that we get 2 of these ADPs that then synthesize into or reuptake their phosphates so that they turn into ATP. And you also get this stuff here, NADH. This will be more explained a little bit later on, but NADH is an ATP precursor. So our net product we get. So right here, you are minus 2 ATP. Here and here, you are plus 4 ATP. You get 1, 2 NADH, and you also get 2 pyruvate. That pyruvate can go one of 2 ways. So pyruvate will immediately get transferred into or transform into lactate. That will either go then convert into acetyl-CoA, or it will recycle back up through into gluconeogenesis to reform glucose. So remember, glycolysis is the only process we have that gives us immediate ATP. Protein breakdown, fat breakdown does not give you any ATP in their initial pathways. This is why carbs need to be your primary fuel source, your primary macronutrient intake during the day, because they're the only ones that are going to give you that immediate energy. You store round about like 5 to 10 seconds worth of ATP. So you can go from now into like a dead sprint and rely strictly on the ATP your body has built up or has stored. But if you didn't produce any additional ATP, you would quite literally just die after about 5 or 10 seconds of using that. So the carbs are giving us that immediate fuel source. I mean, making 2 to 1 on my money is a pretty good return. But in the grand scheme of things, that's not a whole lot. So it's like if you were to, say, invest in your retirement, and 30 years from now, your money had only doubled, you'd probably be a little upset. Because after decades, you expect multiple or exponentially greater amount of money to be made. Same thing with our ATP. This is good and all, but I mean, it can be a lot better, which we'll see it does. We haven't talked so much about the Cori cycle, but the Cori cycle is what takes lactate and sends it back up either through skeletal muscle or into the liver to form glycogen. So all you're doing really is you're recycling your blood lactate to then eventually turn back into glycogen. Lactate is one of the primary substrates that's used to reconvert glucose and reconvert or build glycogen. And then our two different glycogen producers here, you have glycogenesis and glycogenolysis. Glycogenesis is just our buildup of glycogen. Glycogenolysis is our breakdown of glycogen. When you look at, say, glycolysis here, above this is glycogen. So you have to break down glycogen, if you're using glycogen, first before you go into glycolysis. Once you're at glycolysis, you only have glucose. Now with fats, fats take a lot longer to actually use. First off, they're a lot bigger than carbs, but also you have to transport fats. How useful would it be to, say, turn your belly fat into ATP at the site that it's being stored? Why not? I mean, what is here? So if we, what's all right here? No, it's just fat. There's nothing useful here. So if I just turned all this into ATP right here, it's not anywhere close to somewhere that it's needed, right? And then remember, what is our only fat that we have that we can actually use for energy? Triglycerides. And where are those located? In the bloodstream, yes. They're located in the bloodstream because the blood will transport them to wherever it is they're needed. So remember, with a fat cell, it's also called a goblet cell, you'll cleave off layers upon layers of it, and each layer is a triglyceride. Now, just like everything else, you can both build up and break down fats. Lipogenesis just means that you're adding these layers of triglycerides back on. Very easy to do so. Lipolysis, just your breakdown of fat, so it's just cleaving off those triglycerides. But unlike, say, glycolysis, lipolysis is a two-stage process. Not only do you have to cleave off these bits here of triglyceride to send those out, you have to take that triglyceride and then turn it into a fatty acid. That goes through the bloodstream, where it then will be absorbed by muscles. And then you have a process called beta oxidation, which will give you acetyl-CoA. What is the one thing you see here that you didn't see in glycolysis? I mean, aside from the fact that it's fats versus carbs. There's one big thing that sticks out. I mean, you got a 10% chance. There's only 10 words up there. Not so much. Well, that's not up here. So again, it's just here. There we go. What does oxidation require? Oxygen, yes. We can do glycolysis without oxygen. It is an anaerobic process. With fat breakdown, any kind of lipolysis, you need oxygen. It is an aerobic process. Oxygen is a heavy energy producer. But how quickly does it work? I mean, if you went and worked out right now and did like a high intensity workout, how much fat would you actually burn? Maybe an ounce, roundabout, directly. Whereas you could burn upwards of, 500-600 calories or more of carbs. With using oxygen, it will oxidize or burn the fat, which gives us a ton of ATP, but it takes a long time for that to happen. Because it takes so long for this to turn on, it means that functionally, when you're doing any physical activity, the harder you work or the higher intensity at which you go, the less fat you burn. Why would that be? Kind of. When you have that high intensity or that high energy need, what is the quickest way to get energy? Glycolysis, which happens anaerobically. So if you do a high intensity workout, the majority of the calories you burn are going to be carbs. However, as we'll see later on, what happens afterward is you get this afterburn effect, where you at rest, your body shifts your metabolism to mostly burning fats. So if you want to lose fat mass, it doesn't matter what you do during the exercise, it's all about what happens after. And we'll explain that more a little bit later. Here's the key thing with this. Acetyl-CoA is my main product that I get from this whole process. The acetyl-CoA is what I'm going to send over to the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle. You have no direct energy production from fat breakdown. And then with proteins, we have proteolysis or amino acid catabolism, which is deamination. We've talked about this already a little bit, so not really going to focus too much on this one. Now, here is where we get to our first refinement. There are several different names for this. You have the citric acid cycle, the tricarboxylic acid cycle, or the Krebs cycle. All of those are interchangeable. You can say any of those and they will mean the exact same thing. This is obviously a cycle, so cyclic, but it doesn't produce any direct ATP. This is simply a refiner of acetyl-CoA. So while you have different pieces entering at different areas here, the main thing is that right here, where this acetyl-CoA enters into the cycle, that is what starts the Krebs cycle. And if you notice, on every single step, you have an ACE. And what are ACEs? Enzymes, yes. So every time you have a step, or every time you're changing something, you need an enzyme to do it. What do I actually get out of this? Well, if you look, I get an NADH, I get an NADH, I get a GTP, I get another NADH. I also am going to get I'm also going to get water, and I get CO2. Some of these will also give me these nice amino acid precursors. So you can go from here back into the protein cycle or the uric acid cycle and then get protein synthesis or amino acid synthesis out of this. So I mean, that's a nice little extra byproduct to get. GTP, if you look on the legend here, that's guanosine triphosphate. Looks awfully close to ATP, right? And it is. It's essentially the it's the person on the wait list kind of thing. You need another enzyme to turn GTP into ATP, but once you get that enzyme in there, it'll readily convert it right to it. But either way, you're really not getting any direct ATP production from the Krebs cycle. Now, the last stage we have here is the electron transport chain. This is where the magic happens. Right here and down, that's inside your mitochondria. And everything above that is outside of it. And if you notice, this channel here is the big separator. The electron transport chain, just as the name says, is a transporter of electrons. All this is going to do is shoot hydrogen ions in and out of the mitochondria. And whenever it does that, it generates ATP. I didn't discuss this, FADH, but that's another similar product as you would see with NADH. But what's happening here is that you get NADH to enter into the electron transport chain. And if you follow along the line here, you'll see that whenever it crosses over one of these channels, a hydrogen ion will shoot out and bind with this, so bind with one of their negative ions. Shoots out there, so eventually you're cleaving off most of this to get NAD, and then you're going to get oxygen, or I'm sorry, not oxygen, you're going to get water as an end product. Eventually what's happening here is that you get your ADP to add on an additional phosphate which gets bound by your hydrogen ion to turn into ATP. Now, I always thought that any model you look at of the electron transport chain is kind of misleading because it doesn't do it justice for just how much ATP is produced, because you're only seeing one end result here. But what's actually happening is you're getting a ton of this ATP to actually shoot out. And this just shows you all of what happens. And here's the actual math to it. So the big thing, here are your sources of ATP precursors, and here's how much ATP they give you. So an FADH gives you 1.5 ATPs, an NADH gives you 2.5 ATPs, acetyl-CoA gives you 10 ATPs. This is why fats produce so much energy, because what is the only product they give from beta oxidation? Acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA is a huge precursor to ATP. Now, acetyl-CoA itself can't be used in the electron transport chain. So what's actually happening is each one of these acetyl-CoAs will go roughly 4 cycles in the Krebs cycle. So for each NADH that it gives off, it's essentially going a full cycle. So that's kind of where you get that conversion rate. Now, in terms of how we're getting, or how much total ATP we're getting, this here is glucose, and this here is palmitic acid. Palmitic acid's a fatty acid. So remember, we had, from glycolysis, we had that net 2 ATP at the beginning. Now, you're getting NADH and FADH, but see again how it says here, to the electron transport chain, to the electron transport chain. You're not actually getting any of this ATP happening until you actually get to the electron transport chain. Now, depending on the source you look, you'll see this really anywhere from roughly 28 to 32 ATPs being produced. But what's the one thing that is not produced here that is produced over here? I'll give you a hint, it's right here. So while you do get this conversion of pyruvate to acetyl-CoA at the end of glycolysis, it doesn't actually go straight to the Krebs cycle. It's going to be converted into NADH and then sent to the electron transport chain. When you get acetyl-CoA, you have to oxidize it. Now, when I am oxidizing this, I'm going to get, quite a bit of future ATP, just not anything right this second. Now, don't worry about this little piece here, just calculating it. But one thing to note is that you can tell how many carbons are on this by using just the formula C/2 equals acetyl-CoA. So if I have 8 acetyl-CoAs being produced by this, how many carbons is palmitic acid? 16, yeah. So double the amount of acetyl-CoA, that's how many carbons you get for a fatty acid. All right, how are we doing so far? I know this is a lot of information really quick. And we could spend a whole semester doing this, not just, 30 minutes. How are you feeling about the overall process? So again, I don't expect you to remember all the nuances. What I do expect you to remember is that in glycolysis, we produce ATP. Glycolysis is the only initial metabolic processes that actually gives us immediate ATP. You should know these things that we get from glycolysis. You should know that for fats to be used, you have to oxidize them, so you need oxygen. Oxygen takes a long time to work, but it gives us a lot more future ATP. The only product we get from fat oxidation is acetyl-CoA. And remember, acetyl-CoA represents future ATP. All the Krebs cycle does is it takes acetyl-CoA and refines it. It sends NADH and FADH to the electron transport chain. Once we get to the electron transport chain, we create our ATP, and that's that. So I would know this part here about how to find how many carbons you have on a fatty acid. And I would remember this part right here, which tells you how much ATP and FADH and NADH and acetyl-CoA are worth. All right, now getting into what happens when we eat in relation to some of these substrate utilizations. If you're eating a lot, especially if you're eating a lot of carbs, you are going to see your body store more glycogen. Our bodies like to stay the same. You don't just say magically gain 20 pounds overnight, or you don't lose 20 pounds overnight either. Whenever your body takes one macronutrient to convert it to another, it takes a whole lot of effort. And your body is, for all intents and purposes, pretty lazy. It likes things to run efficiently because it doesn't really like to work hard. I mean, how good do you feel during a high intensity workout? I mean, it's the best thing for you in terms of exercise. It's also the least enjoyed type of exercise you can have. And it's because our bodies don't like being taxed. We don't like to have to do so much effort of something. Part of the reason why it feels so good after a workout is because you're freaking done with it. So when we overconsume carbs, what's happening is that you are going to increase your glycogen stores. You may have heard the term carb loading. Carb loading doesn't mean that you stuff yourself full of, fettuccine Alfredo for days on end. It just means that you have a really slight increase in your carb intake about a week to 10 days before you have say an event, especially an endurance event. And you'll actually be able to kind of overfill your stores of carbs. So like if you've ever, say, filled a glass with some sort of liquid, say like water, if you were to just dump all the water straight in there, what would happen? Yeah, it'll like splash out, right? But what happens if I have like a very slow trickle? Yeah, and I can fill that glass up, you know, theoretically to just over the brim, because surface tension of like water or any liquids will hold it, that fluid in place, even if it's slightly outside of it. That's what's happening with carb loading. You are slowly filling up the gas tank so that you fill it to the absolute limit. If you just throw a ton of carbs at yourself, it's like you're splashing that water around and you're not going to get all of it to stick. If you overconsume fats, well, that's pretty easy. Your body stores it. This is the whole premise behind why like many like weight loss diets in like the 80s and 90s were developed. It was the thought that if I reduce fat intake or eliminate fat intake, I'm going to eliminate my body's storage of fat. It doesn't quite work that way. But, you know, I could see how you'd get there. And if we overconsume proteins, well, remember, proteins we don't store. So your body uses what it can use, and then you're going to have urea production, and then also fat storage. If I'm fasting, first, I'm going to be using glycogen. When I run out of glycogen, I'm going to use body fat. If I am, and this fasting here is in the fine print, you'll see this is about 2 to 3 hours after a meal. That's when your body is going to start really breaking down your stored glycogen. When you eat after you've been depleting glycogen, the first thing your body has to do is to restore that glycogen. So this is why you'll see like many people who are like bodybuilders or whatever, they eat every couple hours. And it's so your body doesn't start breaking down or have to start breaking down and then replenishing glycogen. It can stick strictly to either fat metabolism or protein synthesis where applicable. Now, this part C here is fasting beyond glycogen depletion. This happens after about 24 hours of starvation. Most of us have more glycogen than we need. If you were out, you know, doing taxing physical labor or any sort of like heavy exercise, yeah, you're going to need to be constantly replacing that. But for the most part, average American diet, you have plenty of glycogen that's being produced. If that runs out, first off, you're going to get hangry, which is never a good feeling. But you're going to first use proteins to break down into glucose, which our body doesn't like to do, but it will. If you force me to do it, I'll do it. And then it'll start breaking down body fats. We can convert proteins at the rate of 2 to 3 grams of protein for every 1 gram of carbs. So how terrible is that? Not only are you using proteins to make ATP, but you have to burn 2 to 3 times the amount of proteins to get the same 1 gram of carbs. Not a good ratio there. This is also why muscle wasting can happen so fast. You know, if you were bedridden for like a week, you would experience muscle wasting. Our muscles are quite literally use it or lose it, because your muscles are so metabolically active and energy demanding that if you're not keeping up using them, our body says, what's the point of feeding these muscles with all these calories they're not using? So let's just take those away and, you know, go on our merry way. All right, we've talked about a ketogenic diet and ketone production a little bit already. Now, this here kind of breaks this down a little bit better. You're creating ketones in the liver, and you do this only when you have a lack of carbs. Your body will regularly create ketones. However, you're not producing them in really any substantial amount. And it's because whenever you have carbs available, there's no need to produce ketone bodies because we have carbs. Carbs are 100% anti-ketogenic, meaning you cannot turn carbs into ketones. They are complete polar opposites. You can turn fats and proteins into ketones. Remember, fats in the form of triglycerides have this nice glycerol head. So about 5 to 10% of fats in the form of triglycerides are ketogenic, and about 50% of proteins are ketogenic. Not good ratios when you're trying to conserve, but you see how beneficial this could potentially be if you're trying to lose fat. And again, that's one of the major premises of a ketogenic diet, is that it forces your body to primarily turn to fat oxidation for your energy requirements. You burn a ton of fat, but the expense you have is in initial energy. Because you can't send ketones into glycolysis directly, you're not going to get that initial energy from glycolysis or from carbs that you normally would have. So anyone who's on a ketogenic diet will be really good at endurance, absolutely horrendous at anaerobic events. If you were to try to sprint, yeah, you can sprint once, maybe 2 times. Your fatigue for anaerobic events is going to be like that though, because you cannot produce that immediate ATP from carbs because you don't have any carbs. You have to oxidize ketones. So oxygen gives you a ton of energy, takes a lot of time. I used to be staunchly against the ketogenic diet. And that was really just because we didn't see any research that supported it. And now we are seeing research that supports it in more than just a medically induced diet. We've known, and by we I mean researchers have known, that a ketogenic diet is amazing for, like say, children with epilepsy. We're finding that it's very, very beneficial for people with type 2 diabetes. Very, very bad for people with type 1 diabetes. So if you have type 1 diabetes, stay away. But for regular everyday people, a ketogenic diet has been shown to be generally safe. I mean, it's a difficult diet to do because if you're greatly reducing carbs, it's, the foods you have are going to be much more savory than sweet, but it will help with weight loss overall. So if you're able to do the diet, it's beneficial, but it's a difficult diet to do. And then here just shows you that whole breakdown there. So just like I said, ketones have to be oxidized. If you have a ketogenic diet, you need to have a diet that's heavy in unsaturated fats. If you're having tons of saturated fats, you're not helping yourself at all. Because any benefit you would get from turning on fat production is going to be negated by the fact that you're going to have a lipid profile that's going to largely skew towards an increase in LDL cholesterol. Remember we talked about that being an atherogenic diet, or something that promotes atherosclerosis. So if you're doing it right, you're doing this kind of ratio here. About 3 to 4 fats, or grams of fat for every 1 gram of proteins and every 1 gram of carbs. Many people that don't correctly do a ketogenic diet who are attempting it will increase proteins commensurate with the decrease in carbs, which is not at all what you want to do. A ketogenic diet is a high fat, low carb, low protein diet. So you want to keep protein intake about the same. You just want to take away virtually all your carbs, replace it with healthy or unsaturated fats. Does that kind of make sense? All right, any questions on metabolism and what our body does with all our macronutrients? All right, now let's switch gears here into your assignment. Specifically, this part 3. I've kind of talked about this already, but quick reminder here. This is the breakdown of all of our energy or places that we use energy. This here, resting energy, that's your basal metabolic rate, as we think of as just your base metabolism. The thermic effect of feeding is how many calories it costs you to digest food. That stays pretty much the same. It'll change a little bit. Like if you eat spicier foods, it'll tend to increase that. That's like if you ever see somebody eat like a ghost pepper. What do they look like after they eat that? What's that? Yeah, they're like sweating and all that. Now, it's not that the pepper itself is actually hot. It's just that the chemicals in it are going to make your body have the perception that you're hot. So you start sweating. Well, when you start sweating, you produce, or you're having to increase your metabolism. So a person of typical, like say, like Asian or even Hispanic descent will tend to have a higher thermic effect of feeding percentage because their diets tend to have spicier foods in them. Now, this right here, NEAT and EXE, this is the part of your metabolism that you can control the most, because this is what you burn in terms of calories from actual movement. NEAT is non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is any movement you make costs energy. Anytime you move a muscle, you have to use ATP. You cannot do it otherwise. So even sitting there, writing, blinking, all costs energy to do. Now, obviously blinking isn't doing that much for you. I can't say that if I were to sit here and blink all day, as rapidly as I could, then I would be losing a ton of weight, but it still costs energy. Exercise is your actual go out and exercise kind of thing. This is when you have planned repeated movements, sustained activity level. Exercise is one of those things that it's hard to put a definition on. So it's considered to be a planned, sustained activity with relatable physical activity goals. It's like the same thing of how you define a vegetable. You know, what's the definition of a vegetable? I mean, fruit's easy. A fruit is just anything that produces a meat-based thing containing seeds within it. Everything that's a fruit has seeds in it. That's it. All the things that you think of as vegetables, like cucumbers, tomatoes, those are all fruits. But a vegetable is, it has a very, it's very hard to define because there's no standard set definition for a vegetable. It's like one of those things like you could probably point out a million vegetables, you know, figuratively speaking, but can't really define it. Same thing kind of with exercise. When we measure calories, we measure it two ways. So calorimetry is the measure of calories. You either do it directly or you do it indirectly. Remember that calories are a unit of heat. So if you directly measure calories, you measure how much heat you produce. That's why here you're in this closed system and heat rises. So however much this water above you heats up is going to actually provide you with how many calories you actually produced. That's very impractical because you see that you have to have a closed system in place to do that. So indirect is just a measure of your gas exchange. VCO2 divided by VO2. VO2, or volume of oxygen, is the amount of oxygen you can uptake. Uptake means that you are consuming and using. It does you no good if you can consume all the oxygen in the world, but you can't use it. It also doesn't do you any good if you have the best gas exchange in the world, but you can't consume the oxygen. Conversely, carbon dioxide as a waste product isn't something you necessarily consume, but it's something you expel. This becomes problematic if, say, you have something like, say, COPD or any other obstructive pulmonary disease. When you have an obstruction, it means you can't get stuff out. If you have a restriction, like, say, asthma, you can't get it in. So people who have asthma and have an asthma attack have problems breathing in. It's like you're breathing through a straw. It restricts the airways. Whereas if you have COPD, you have a destruction of your alveolar sacs, causing a lot of dead space there, meaning that you can breathe the air in, but it gets trapped in there. So it's very difficult to breathe it out. So are you with me so far? Okay. Part one of that, question 3, is asking about that respiratory exchange ratio, which is that VCO2 divided by VO2. That's not something you're going to calculate because unless you actually go to the lab to do it or find a way to measure your actual gas intake and how much you're breathing out, you can't actually get that number. I'm going to show you how you're going to get that number though, or close to it. EPOC is what I was talking about earlier with that afterburn effect for exercise. EPOC stands for excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. And for all you Game of Thrones fans out there, it just means that a Lannister always pays his debts. Whenever you start doing any sort of physical activity, and you start doing something that requires a lot of effort, what do? Like, what does your body immediately do? You start breathing heavier. Why? Because you need more oxygen, absolutely. What this is showing here in these purple areas, that's how much oxygen you need. This blue area here is how much oxygen you're actually getting. You notice how you are not getting enough oxygen to sustain or to make up for what you need. That becomes problematic. Because if we go back to that VCO2 divided by VO2 ratio, if I'm not getting enough oxygen relative to how much I need, what does it mean about this ratio? Or what does it mean about each of these component parts? How are they changing? Which one? Yes, VO2 will decrease. What about VCO2? Yep. Stop drilling, you hit oil. It's going to increase because, remember, CO2 is a byproduct or a waste byproduct of metabolism. The faster circulation's going, the more of that waste product that's being produced, the more you have to get rid of. Eventually, if my CO2 production was greater than my oxygen consumption, wouldn't I, strictly speaking, only be left with CO2 in my lungs eventually? Now, granted, it doesn't get to that point ever, can't. But if you weren't breathing in oxygen, what do you think would happen to you? I mean, yeah, eventually. You probably pass out first. But yeah, you're not going to keep going, right? So that's why at these high intensity levels, you can't go all day. You fatigue, right? If you look at, say, this light exercise bit, you notice that eventually you get to this steady state. Steady state means that you are consuming enough oxygen to meet the demands of what it is that you're doing. If you were out walking, do any of you ever walk to the point where you were just out of breath? I mean, is it really possible? Probably not. I mean, unless you were like, say, walking upstairs or up a huge incline or something. But if I'm just like walking just on flat ground, that's pretty easy for any apparently healthy adult. Because it's easy, I don't create this oxygen deficit. I'm not breathing heavy. It's easy to do. How much of an afterburn do you think you get from walking? Not much. But after you do any sort of high intensity exercise or any sort of really heavy workout and you're finished, like you just stop exercising, how are you feeling? Tired, you're still breathing a little bit heavier, your heart rate's up. Even though you're at rest, your body still is working hard because it has to make all this up. You create a deficit during the actual exercise itself. So that oxygen deficit is the amount of oxygen you needed that you couldn't get because the exercise was too hard. When you stop, this point here, that's when exercise has stopped. Now you enter this epoch phase. What you're seeing happening is you're seeing that your body needs to pay this back. So your metabolism will raise depending on how hard of a workout you did or what you did, anywhere from about the next 45 minutes to 72 hours, your metabolism will be raised because you have to pay back that oxygen you didn't have. If you don't have oxygen that's going to a body part, what's that called? So for all of you that got that answer correct, congratulations, you were a great future nurse and or doctor. And for those of you that just want to enjoy the show, that is what is called ischemia. So anytime you have ischemia, you have a lack of oxygen to a given body part. If you have ischemia to your heart, you get angina pectoris or chest pains. If you get a complete shut off of oxygen to the heart, you have a myocardial infarction or a heart attack. More likely, what will happen to all of you young folks out here is that if you, say, started running, you would get, like, say, a stitch or something like a cramp in your side. That is a form of ischemia. You're not actually getting a muscle spasm in there like you would see with, like, a traditional cramp from, like, say, dehydration or overexertion, but you're getting a lack of oxygen to a given area of your body. Typically, it happens when you go from, like, rest to a high intensity very quickly. And it's because you're not allowing enough time for your blood to escape from your internal organs to your skeletal muscle. And so until that happens, you get those, like, stitches or kind of cramps that you'll feel, like, in your side or something like that. The longer this epoch lasts, the better. Because how much energy do you need to just sit here right now? Now, differentiate just the energy you need to, like, stay alive versus, like, the energy and motivation you need to stay awake. But how much energy is actually costing you all just to sit there? None. I mean, yeah, a little bit, but like nothing. Especially not compared to exercise. So if you don't require much energy, but my metabolism goes up, what does that mean my body has time to do? Do what? Make ATP from where? You're halfway there. Oh, living on a prayer. What takes the longest to do to make ATP? Think back to what I said about a ketogenic diet, and why that's bad for, like, say, anaerobic athletes. So remember, when I am burning fats, I have to oxidize them. Oxygen takes a long time to happen. If my body has an immediate energy demand, like I'm running a sprint, I need carbs, because my carbs are going to give me that initial ATP from glycolysis. If I don't have an immediate high need for energy, what system can my body turn to? There you go. If I don't need energy, my body will turn mostly to fat production because it has enough time to break down fats via oxidation, because I don't have that immediate need for energy. So when you're at rest after a high intensity workout, your metabolism gets raised, and not only that, your fat production gets turned on, or your fat production for ATP gets turned on. This is why I say that the workout itself doesn't matter. It's what happens afterward that matters. Because now, if we go back to this here, it's respiratory exchange ratio. If you notice, what this is saying is it's saying my let me try this. So respiratory exchange ratio is just VCO2 divided by VO2. Depending on where that number is, will tell you how much fat I'm burning and how much carbs I'm burning. You may also see the term non-protein RQ, or respiratory quotient. When you're at rest, your RER is going to be down here. In terms of an activity that you would be doing to be at that low RER, you're doing low intensity. So this is an activity you would do where you're not breathing heavily. You're probably breathing through your nose for the most part. Once you have to start breathing through your mouth, you're going to be at least, really at least right here, if not higher. Breathe, think, something like that. Because as soon as you start breathing out of your mouth, your body is signaling you need more air. When I need more air, it means I'm going to be burning much more carbs. Roughly up in here, this is going to be moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity. When you get up here, this is high intensity. An easy way to do this, or to tell if something is low, moderate, or high, is to do something called a talk test. When you're doing an activity, if you can carry on a conversation with somebody, you are at a low intensity. If you can respond in full sentences but could not carry on a conversation, you're at moderate to vigorous intensity. If you struggle to complete full sentences, you are at high intensity. Is that an easy enough way to do it? Like I said, you're not going to be able to calculate RER directly because you don't have the tools to do it. But by using something like, say, a talk test, or by just estimating based on what your physiological response is to the exercise, you should be able to give an idea of where you're at on that scale. Once you get past here, EPOC becomes substantially higher. So once the majority of your substrate utilization is carbs, that's when EPOC gets to its highest. Ideally, you know, if you really wanted to be burning tons of fat, you would actually want to be working up here. Now, RER doesn't end at 1. You can go above that, but that's when you're talking about, like, say, VO2 max testing or something like that. Because remember, if I am producing more carbon dioxide than I can consume oxygen, I'm going to fatigue very quickly. So when that RER gets above 1, it means CO2 is greater than O2. You're going to fatigue extremely quickly. Like, you're at the end kind of thing there. Does that all kind of make sense? So if we go back to the assignment here, oops. Do you feel like you could take a physical activity and at least estimate where you would be at on that RER chart? Yes, no, maybe so. For what? All right, so like I said, if you're roughly around in here, where the overwhelming majority of what you're burning is fat, that's low intensity. When you are getting around this area, that's going to be moderate to vigorous. When you get well above where you're burning mostly carbs, it's high intensity. What that translates to is this would be breathing very heavy, mouth breathing, nose breathing. An example activity would be, like, say, for this, like walking at a slow pace. Mouth breathing may be like climbing upstairs. Very heavy breathing would be like running or sprinting. Does that kind of help? Well, I would want, yeah, you want to give me a number. And again, that's why I said that I'm not concerned if you get the right or wrong answer. I just want to see what your thought process is. Because I want to see that you have an understanding that, say, a low intensity exercise should be low on the chart. Like, if you said you were doing sprints and came back with an RER of, like, say, 0.76 is what you told me, that would show me that you didn't have an understanding at all of this. I'm looking, like, I'm not concerned if you say 0.8 versus 0.9 even. But does the activity measure roughly with where on the chart that would be? So just remember, the closer you get to 1, the higher the intensity, or the harder the exercise or activity is. And this is also why I say you can pick whatever activity you want. So, you know, doing something potentially really simple can be the easiest way out. But I just want to see, like, how your thought process goes with that. And then to further add to it is going back into the EPOC bit. For the EPOC, I want to see if it's going to be short, moderate, or long. If you do a very light intensity exercise or low intensity exercise, you're going to have a short epoch. If you do a high intensity exercise, you're going to be a long epoch. So I want to see not only that you can assign the correct RER range for an activity, but also that you recognize that RER directly correlates with or is directly proportional to your epoch. The higher your RER, the longer your epoch. The lower your RER, the shorter your epoch. So are you feeling better about that? Okay. And again, I mean, say it again, but because I'm not concerned if you get the right or wrong answer, I just want to see what the thought process is. Don't stress too much about it. It's a BLA. It's not a final. All right, so that is everything new I have for you there. So I'll actually let you all out a bit early, surprisingly for once. But if you have any more questions, I will obviously stick around so you all leave. If not, I will see you all then, well, next Thursday.